Hi, welcome to It Should Be News, a programme where citizen TV makers ensure important issues underreported by the mainstream media get a hearing. I'm Marisa Pereira. Today we'll be discussing the fact that the democratic will of the British citizens following the Brexit vote has still not been acted upon. We are delighted to have Tom Slater with us today. Tom is the deputy editor of the online magazine Spiked and coordinator of the Invoke Article 50 Now campaign. To start us off, Tom, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the Invoke Article 50 Now campaign that you're running and why did you set it up?
So the Invoke Article 50 Now campaign was set up in the wake of the European referendum to try and generate some public pressure on the government to enact the people's will. As we all know, the Brexit vote was the biggest democratic mandate in British political history, and we think that there's a very real chance that it won't actually be acted upon. We believe that it's profoundly suspicious that this far on from the Brexit vote, Article 50, the process by which we leave the European Union, has not been triggered, and that anyone who considers themselves a Democrat needs to be really vigilant. As we've all seen in the wake of the Brexit vote, all of the kind of anti-democratic forces in our society were really lining up against it, doing it down, saying it was the product of irrational voters, as well as some very real plots and schemes to try and stop it from happening. And that's not only bad for people who want to leave the European Union, it's bad for democracy itself if that huge democratic uprising is not recognised.
Some people suggest that if we have a bit more time, we can get a better deal from Brussels. So why are you campaigning for Article 50 to be invoked immediately?
Well, I think the first point is that it should be invoked immediately because that's what we all assumed would happen. This is what we were told was part of the deal. You know, everyone from David Cameron, even people in the Remain campaign, said your vote would be acted upon in million-pound literature. So I think there's that point. But as for the suggestion that somehow delaying will make sure we get a better deal with Brussels, that will be better in the long run, I'm just not buying it. I mean, first of all, is the kind of tactical reason. We all know that under EU law, under the Lisbon Treaty, formal negotiations can't even begin until Article 50 is triggered. You had this ridiculous situation a few weeks ago where Boris Johnson, our new Foreign Secretary, was having a meeting in Brussels with all the foreign ministers and Brexit wasn't allowed to be on the agenda. So it's just ridiculous to my mind that this will somehow allow us to get a better deal. As far as I'm concerned, the only people it's good for tactically to delay invoking Article 50 is the people who want to thwart it. The longer that this goes on, the more and more the various campaigns to overturn it, to scupper it, will kind of gather pace, and I think that it's completely within our interest to invoke it now, not just tactically but also on the principle that this is what the people voted for and this is what should be delivered to them.
So you refer to people trying to thwart this. What is driving them?
Well, I think that what the Brexit vote really brought to the fore was that our elite, our political class, who would always kind of pay lip service to the idea of democracy, constantly talk about how they wanted the public to be more involved, actually really despise and are terrified by that idea. I think the kind of mainstream response from the political class, which is just to kind of dither, to put it off, speaks to the fact that fundamentally the thing that motivates them more than even love for the EU is fear of the public actually being in control of democratic politics again. For a very long time, politics is something that was conducted on a very technical level by all these people, and once every 5 years we were just allowed to shuffle the deck a bit. In the aftermath of the Brexit vote, all sorts of huge questions about how society should be run have been thrown back into the public square, and I think that genuinely terrifies them.
I understand your point about invoking Article 50 immediately. There are people that argue that the Brexit vote has already affected the economy. So is there something in this?
This argument that it's somehow better for the economy if we wait, if we allow things to stabilise, I just don't think that's the case. I mean, we saw the fevered response from the EU saying, please invoke it immediately because it will provide some stability for business, for investment, for all of these different areas. I think just really puts paid to this idea that it's somehow better for the economy. And of course, this has been an argument throughout the whole referendum campaign that, again, something as significant as leaving the EU would be terrible for Britain's economy going forward. And I think that ultimately the opposite is true. There's a lot of problems with our own economy, with the economies across Europe, and these are all long-term problems in terms of the flatlining of productivity, the fact that we can't produce anything anymore, the fact we're so reliant on quantitative easing, etc., which have really been kept out of, again, democratic politics this entire time. So on the one hand, I don't think we should necessarily use reasons about what's going to be best for the economy in the short term to judge whether or not we should, observe a democratic mandate. But at the same time, I think the quicker that a lot of these questions, which have been basically ring-fenced by the European Union about what sort of economy we want, how we're going to address the long-form problems, it's all the more better for us politically as well to be able to take those on quickly. So I don't think there's an argument that it's going to be better for the economy in the short term if we put this off. And I actually think if we're looking at addressing those long-term problems, we should pull those back again into the democratic public square and have them out in a way that we haven't been able to up until now.
So what about the legal campaign to try and overturn the result? What do you think about that?
So this is one of the more shocking and, as I was saying, kind of explicit examples of a section of the elite looking to try and thwart the democratic will of the people. So there's a couple of legal challenges, but perhaps the most significant is a group of as yet unnamed business interests who are funding a challenge via the law firm Mishcon de Reya. Now, on the surface, this challenge looks very technical and very kind of dry. It's talking about what are the right constitutional ways in which we can enact the Brexit vote. And their argument is that if you invoke Article 50, you would nullify bits of European legislation. That's bad because it's happening without a vote in Parliament. But I think that that's really just nonsense. First of all, because these questions are not a foregone conclusion, but also because it's very clear that in terms of who's backing this, in terms of the various kind of spurned Remain campaigners who are jumping on this and seeing it as an opportunity for MPs to block it in Parliament, that really this is just an underhanded attempt to stop Brexit from happening. So yes, under the idea of just trying to clarify the rules, it's just an attempt to, again, scupper the Brexit vote.
So is there a possibility, given the opposition to the Brexit vote, that it will never happen?
I think there's a very real possibility that this might not happen. I think there's a tendency on behalf of even some people who backed Leave, who backed the Out campaign, to basically trust the elite to get on with it. They believe that when Theresa May, our new Prime Minister, says Brexit means Brexit, that we should just basically take their word for it. And I think that's just profoundly naive. Now, I don't think that Theresa May or the government are somehow secretly plotting to just completely overturn this decision. I don't think they basically have the chutzpah to do that. I think that what they want to do as a profoundly kind of risk-averse group of people, they want to put it off and put it off and put it off so that they are not the ones who are responsible for this huge democratic political change. And I think the problem with that is that because of all that dithering, you just open up the field for all of these kind of very determined anti-democratic people, like we've been talking about, to really launch these schemes and to stop Brexit from happening.
Tom, that's really worrying. But on a different note, there's also a group of people out there that are really concerned, all those EU citizens leaving the UK. Me, as a Portuguese person, I actually support Brexit, but I have a lot of family members and friends that actually are very worried with their situation. How does your campaign address that?
Well, I think the status of EU migrants has very much still been left up in the air, but I think that's entirely down to our own government at the moment. If you look at any of the kind of survey data or any of the press releases been put out by various Leave campaigns, the vast majority of both Brexit voters and even people like UKIP have said that of course there should be right to remain for EU migrants. Genuinely, the only person right now who wants to leave that dangling is Theresa May, who, as we all know, her record in terms of migration is pretty shocking and is looking to use this as a bit of a bargaining chip. So as far as our campaign is concerned, this is just another example about how we can't trust our political class in terms of making Brexit happen and also making it happen in the best interest of everyone. This, along with so many other issues, I think we need to put pressure on them for, because at the moment it's not Brexiteers, it's not these people who are smeared as xenophobes throughout all this campaign who are leaving the status of EU migrants dangling. It's our own government and we need to change that.
Is triggering Article 50 divisive? Because after all, right, almost half of the country voted to remain. Almost all Scotland voted to remain. So what do you have to say about that?
I think that's interesting. It's certainly something that's come up in the wake of the Brexit vote, and people are almost balking at the idea that the problem with this vote is that, of course, the winners take all. You know, you've got one section slightly bigger than the other who have been able to make this decision on behalf of everyone else. And I think the first point I would make is that's called democratic politics. It's about conflict, it's about the clash, it's about certain people ultimately prevailing over others and the rest of society having to go along with that. And so I don't think we should shy away from that. That is the sort of democratic politics that we want, one which is about contestation, it is about different views colliding. That's good. But at the same time, I think that I've noticed this, I'm sure many other people have as well, that even among many people who voted Remain, there's a desire to get on with this. They recognise that the British people have spoken, and that it's not all doom and gloom, that the world isn't going to hell in a handcart because we voted to leave the EU. So on the one hand, it's good that that sense of democratic clash has kind of resurged post-Brexit vote. That's what democratic politics was all about, and that's the sort of spirit we wanted to reclaim by leaving the EU.
Tom, you have written about the fact that the way the elite has responded to the Brexit vote demonstrated the extent to which Victorian elitism has returned. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that if you just go back and compare the kind of responses to the Brexit vote, to the various struggles throughout the Victorian period, throughout the 1800s, for enhancing the franchise, for extending it, the arguments are strikingly similar. So when the Chartists in the 1830s were campaigning for the vote to be extended to all men in England, the sorts of arguments that were coming out from politicians, from the elite, were incredibly similar to the ones that we heard post-Brexit. Suggestions that they were just hoodwinked by demagogues, that they were kind of wretched poor people who didn't know what they were doing. That's strikingly similar. All of the struggles for democracy has been met with this incredibly disdainful sort of response. And what is incredible is how much that is mirrored. And I think one thing that's really come out post-Brexit is that we have an elite these days which doesn't like to think of itself as an elite. It doesn't really stand up for very much. It doesn't really have much of a sense of itself and much of a sense of ideas. It's quite self-loathing in a lot of ways. But what's been striking is that post-Brexit, when again the demos kind of intruded on politics in such a meaningful way, they showed themselves to be what they are, as a group of elite individuals who have very much the same interests and are terrified about any of those being challenged. So in terms of the piece, it was a case of just pointing out that not only have the arguments against democracy really have never changed, no matter how they're dressed up, but also what Brexit has revealed is that we do have an elite which is completely set against our own interests, completely fearful of democracy, and that the need to make sure that Article 50 is triggered, the need to make sure that that democratic will is recognised, is as pressing now as it has ever been.
When you talk about the elite being scared of the ordinary people making a decision on big political issues, what are they scared about?
I think this is an interesting point because, as I say, I think the elite today doesn't really stand for very much. And so it's not necessarily the case that they're terrified that if the public get more involved in politics that they'll kind of basically vote against the elite's interest. I think they're fundamentally, it's something a little bit more pathetic than that. They're terrified of change, they're terrified of any sort of rupture. They're wedded to the status quo, not because they think it's all fine and dandy, but because they just can't even think about what might come next. So whilst there is of course a lot of just prejudice towards the masses, there's a lot of sense of which we're irrational, we don't know what we're doing, and that's really been revealed post-Brexit. But in many ways it's what goes along with that is just a terrifying fear of change itself, and that's really what democratic politics means. It means contest, it means conflict, it means ultimately change, and I think that's really what puts the wind up the elite and what makes them so close ranks against it.
So following on from that, what do you think Brexit should mean and should look like for you?
See, for me, I think Brexit means a new beginning, and it's simple as that, insofar as, and this is a core part of our campaign and a core part of our argument, is that in terms of triggering Article 50, this is only really the beginning of rebuilding a real democratic politics. The thing about the European Union is that it put a kind of blanket on top of all of these issues. It wanted to keep all of these political questions outside of the public space, outside of us to be able to actually discuss them. What we've now got is a real opportunity to discuss questions of the economy, questions of immigration, questions of society, and to make sure that the anti-democratic forces, not just in the EU but in our own country, are really taken to task. So the most exhilarating thing about Brexit is that it's uncertain. We don't know where it will go, we don't know what new ideas might emerge, but it's an opportunity for us to really take back that sense of self-determination. So I'm not going to be too prescriptive about it. I don't think it should be one thing. I've got my own ideas about how society should move forward, but the really exhilarating thing is that it is exciting and it's a new beginning and it's something that we can all be involved in, but what that looks like, who knows?
So what are the plans for the campaign that you are running?
So for us, it's all about now kind of upping the ante and what we've done so far, and the thing that we're all working towards at the moment is our biggest demonstration yet, which will take place on the 5th of September outside Parliament between 4 and 6 p.m. That's to coincide with a debate that's going on in Parliament on a petition which is calling for there to be a second referendum on the Brexit vote, basically for there to be a rerun of it under the argument that we were all too hoodwinked and that we didn't know what we were doing. And so we're there to make a very positive point that this, again, isn't just about invoking Article 50, this isn't just about Brexit even, it's about recognising that the EU referendum was a profound democratic awakening, that the Brexit vote was the biggest democratic mandate in our history, and it needs to be respected, and that any attempts to try and block this should be exposed for how anti-democratic they are. So we're planning big things, and for us that's the main focus, to make that really positive case, not just for Brexit, but for democracy, because that's really what underlines all of this.
Thank you so much, Tom, for some great points. And it's clear that the Invoke Article 50 Now campaign should certainly be news. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's programme. And if you think there is an issue that is not being properly reported on by the mainstream media, please do email us.